Hello and welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. I am Anne, and I am so glad to be joined by the spiritual father for our ministry, Father Paul. How are you doing, Father?
Hello, Anne, and hello, everybody. I'm doing very, very well. Happy Easter season to you all, and Christ is risen for those who say so.
Indeed, he is risen.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm doing very, very well. So it's great to
Oh,
be
that's
back as
great.
always.
Always glad to have you with us. Now, we have been sort of meditating on the theme for our month, which is hope and new beginnings. And the way we've been doing that is by kind of teasing out the theological virtues. These are those virtues that St. Paul talks to us about in his first letter to the Corinthians. So, in our first episode, we kind of dove into the virtue of faith. And then last week, we talked about the virtue of hope. And today we're going to round out those three virtues by talking about love. And so we want to spend, I think, a minute just kind of talking about what love is. I mean, defining it as much as we can define love, because, most people describe it as a feeling, right? Our culture is all mixed up about what love means. And but we as Christians have, I think, a much richer and really more authentic understanding of love. So, Father Paul, tell us, what is love?
Oh boy, I think
I
of like
thought I'd throw you an easy one.
sure. Well, I just thought about like 17 different songs that I was going to respond to you with as a joke, but I won't. Fill in your own song about love in your own heads out there. Well, it's going to take more than a minute, so
Yeah.
sorry. So what is love? Well, whenever I preach on this or like teach on it in a scripture sense, or even like talk to couples about, what is love, right? Our modern American English understanding of love is so limited. And here's the example that I use. Okay, so we love, right? We love our spouses, right? We'll say,
Yeah.
I love my wife. I love my husband. I love my parish. I love the church. I love Jesus Christ. But I do love chicken nuggets, and I do love insert your favorite sports team, depending on region here, right? So we
Right.
love all these things. Now, while I can't say this for everyone for sure, I really do hope that you love your spouse more and in a different way than you love chicken nuggets. Okay.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Let's hope. Right. So it's such like this limited understanding, right? And like, what is love? Oh, love is love. Oh, I love him. It's like, well, you just met him, right? Or that kind of, right? And we have this very romanticized idea about what love is in movies and all this stuff. Now, I'm not like poo-pooing that, because there is that romantic essence to it, right? And that, oh, he swept me off my feet. He was so dashing, or like he was just such a good man. And I saw how he interacted with his mom the first day we met, and I knew then he was going to be like, so it's okay. Like, but that's just like one aspect of it. But that's how we use the word. But then it's also, it's a verb, it's an adjective, it's a noun, it's all these different things. And it's really, really contextual, right? So but when we're talking about love in a scripture, faith, gospels, New Testament, apostolic, epistolary kind of way, it's something completely different, right? And I know I'm just going to bring this up because we'll get to it later. We're talking about 1 Corinthians 13, right? So like this is a
Right.
prime example with, love is this, love is that. Well, in the Greek Septuagint, right? If you look in the Greek text, they use the word agape. But now in Greek, there's different types of love, right? Love, there's not just one word for love, right? So there's eros, which is like that, more the physical love between spouses, but then also, love between just people in a more like tangible kind of way, right? Like a friendship type of thing. But then there's also philia, like Philadelphia, right? The city of brotherly love.
Right.
That's where I'm living right now, baby. Anyway, so philia, which is much more of like this, like brotherly love, like this platonic, like I love you in such a way where you can say to like a friend or a cousin or a somebody, pick somebody in your life, like, I just love that person. Like my parish priest helped me through so much, and I just love that man with all my heart, right? Like that would be like philia. But then there's agape, which now this is when we talk about love in the sense that Jesus Christ voluntarily went to his passion and death because he loves us, right? That's the kind of love, this agape, this self-emptying love, this love that is more sacrificial in the sense that it expects nothing in return, right? Like where I love my spouse, he or she loves me, whatever whatever your perspective is, they love me and I love them. And there's a certain like mutual return, right?
Right.
In different aspects. But then there's agape, which is like a transcendent type of love where, yes, like I would give my life for this person. I would, sacrifice all of these things of myself for that person, expecting nothing in return, which is why a lot of times you'll see like in the Dewey Reams translation, as well as, several others, this is translated as charity. Right. So we have faith, hope, and love, but some people say faith, hope, and charity.
Right.
That's the difference. They're not saying like one is about like intimacy and the other one's about like giving money to the Red Cross, right?
Right.
That's not right. No. So that's why you see this different translation. If you look in the Strong's lexicon, yeah, I know I'm doing my whole Father Paul thing right now. But if you look, yes, it is a legitimate way to translate agape in certain contextual places to say charity. So, so that's the kind of love we're going to be talking about today. This self-emptying, non-expectation type of love that pretty much transcends any kind of tangible thing we can define as love. So that's why it's so hard to talk about.
Yeah, it is. And, as I said, I mean, in the culture today, there's this sort of confusion about love, or there is this expectation put on love that it is supposed to be fulfilling, right? That, like, if I love you, that means you will do all the things that will fulfill me. And if you don't, then I guess you don't really love me, and then I don't need to love you anymore, and I can kind of walk away. But that is not the Christian understanding of love. That's not what you have explained, and that's not what the love in marriage is about. So yeah, we're going to talk in a much deeper way about a love that, yes, includes feelings, and like in a marriage, those sort of romantic feelings that you have, which are an important aspect. But I guess that love is more demanding of us than just being a feeling or just kind of doing nice things for each other. Love is really wanting what's good for another person. And that can be hard, even when we're in a marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's the thing, you use the word fulfilling, right? And then I was using the word self-emptying too. So it's weird, this weird dichotomy, but it can be both at the same time, right? Especially, I would say primarily in a Christian context where, like, yes, self-emptying is fulfilling in the long run, right? For instance, like one has to make certain sacrifices for their spouse in the present so that in the future, things will be, I don't want to say better, but things will be richer, things will be fuller, things will be deeper, right? And then that's the beauty about actually being human. As far as, as far as science and sociology can tell us, we're the only animals that can actually do that. So embrace it. Don't run from it, right? And because our culture and society wants us to always be fed, because let's face it, we live in a consumer culture. I'm not going to take that any further than that. But right, we're taught to and conditioned to consume, right? So I also need to be consuming love from this other person. Okay, so they're feeding me, but am I feeding them? Right? That's where that falls apart, right? Because we have that idea of the sort of like doting spouse, right? Whether it's, husband to wife or wife to husband, where they both have that expectation, but you can't. If you're both doting on one another, then nobody's really doing it, like cancels each other out, right?
Right.
So that's why we have to tease this apart and know that there's this real ebb and flow in the marital context of love within the sacramental bonds of marriage in Jesus Christ. So
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Well, luckily we have St. Paul to kind of give us some guardrails and guidelines for that. So let's
Mhm.
jump in.
Yes.
For you and I, we're Byzantine Catholics, and so during the marriage ceremony, we always hear the epistle of St. Paul to the Ephesians, the one that's so misunderstood, but is so, I think, amazing. But for our listeners who are Roman Catholic, they may have the option of choosing this reading from First Corinthians 13. And it really is very beautiful. But I think sometimes if we like dive into it and really listen to what St. Paul is saying, it's still beautiful, but it is also really demanding. But I think in a good way. So I'd like us to kind of use that as we dive more deeply into love, especially for those of us in our community who are in a season of infertility or loss, and just that idea of love can feel, kind of tenuous. We have all sorts of other emotions that are coming into play. We might be grieving a loss, or we might see that marital intimacy as kind of a chore, and not so much of a gift. So let's dive into First Corinthians 13 and just look at some of these characteristics that St. Paul gives us for love. And there's a pretty long list. We're not going to go through all of them, but let's go through a couple of them. First of all, St. Paul tells us what love is not. And so I think it might be helpful for us to look at a couple of those. So, one of the things that St. Paul says is that love is not jealous or pompous or inflated. And I think that jealousy is probably one we could tease out, especially with regard to the emotions that we might be feeling in this community.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, right off the bat, the whole jealousy um, qualifier, that comes from the whole like, I want what they have, right? Or look at what they have, or I want this, or I want that. And how many of us going through the various aspects of seasons of infertility just experience that on like not even a daily basis, but on a momentary basis sometimes, especially with I'm not going to hate too much on social media today with considering what we're doing, but
Right.
when we get into that whole idea of like doom scrolling, right? Like there's definitely good things about social media and bad, right? So we get into that doom scrolling and we're seeing like, oh, all of this stuff and look how happy they are. I wish I was this happy with my wife or with my husband and all of these things. And then really what that is brooding and fostering jealousy, right? Because you're just jealous of the other person. There's really not so much, it's not that like your love between your spouse is necessarily like deficient, right? Or the marriage is deficient. It's
Right.
the fact that you're focused on what the other person perceptibly has. I just made up words there. Maybe we can
That's
edit.
okay. We can do that.
Okay, yeah, I just made up words there. Okay, right. So you're perceiving that these folks have it all, right? And then you're like, well, I don't have X, Y, and Z. So the problem is not inherently like in the marriage or in the relationship, but it comes from an external source of jealousy or coveting, and that's what St. Paul's getting there, where we need to, how do I say this? We need to focus on our relationship, right? Love is not jealous because love is between me and you, right? This kind of love. We're not like trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? We're not trying to be like that couple. We're not trying to be like this couple. We're being this couple. We're us. We are the ones who are married. So it's not about them. It's about us. And that's why.
I love that, because my question to you was going to be, okay, then what's the antidote to that jealousy, that tendency to look around us and say, wow, look at all the things that they have. And that's just it, what you just said. I mean, we need to refocus, I think, uh in on ourselves, on our marriage, not in a self-centered way, but in that way that we were talking about a minute ago, like are we pouring out ourselves to each other? Like, that's what we need to focus on. And are we open to receiving each other too?
Exactly. Right. And if we're too busy worried about what someone else's marriage looks like, then we're not, right? I mean, not to be harsh about it, but that's the truth, right? We're really receiving whatever's going on the other side of that computer screen or that conversation or that TV show or what have you, or like what our neighbors are gossiping at, as we're walking down the street, as opposed to receiving what's actually in front of us. And that's our spouse. And so that's why St. Paul kind of, I think what he's saying here, it's like that, love is not jealous in and of itself, but the love between you and your spouse cannot be jealous if it is going to be agape, if it is going to be transcendent, self-sacrificial, charitable love.
Yes. And I mean, and obviously all of these things that St. Paul's talking about take work, right? They take our initiative, but most importantly, they take God's grace, and they take, us going to him all the time, going in prayer, and, kind of solidifying that relationship and re-solidifying that relationship with God.
Yeah, I mean, not to play language games here, but look at like the Greek word for liturgia, right? Liturgy, right? For liturgy is work, right? Or even in Church Slavonic, we'll say služba Božja, like God's work, right? And that's the work we're doing. But then the fact that the marriage, right, the sacramental marriage takes place within that construct, right? Within that construct of God's work and the work of the people. That's where it's cemented, right? It's work. And down a little ways, it's just, what does St. Paul say at the end of the chapter 13? When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. You grow up, right? So that's what we do in our marriages. It's work, and we have to grow. And we can say, if you get married young, right, in our 20s or what have you, like, yeah, it's a long growing period. But even if we get married, later in our lives, like if we meet, our spouse at the age of 45 or 50 or whatever, we might be entering it slightly more mature than we were when we were 25, God willing, right?
Right.
But that marriage itself, that union, while we might have, if we enter a marital relationship a little later on in our lives, sure, we're more mature, maybe got a little bit of a leg up, but that relationship, that marriage in Jesus Christ, that sacramental marriage, still takes that work, right? It's still a new bond. So we have to realize that it's not just, perfect from day one. Not to be negative, but it's true.
Right.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
and that's why we're in it together. That's why we're in
Absolutely.
it together.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to go to one more of these characteristics that St. Paul says love is not, and then we're going to look at the positive things that he says love is. And that is, he says that love is not rude. And the first thing that came to my mind when I read that in a situation where you are in a season of infertility specifically is some of those intrusive questions or those offers of solutions that people can make to us. Sometimes it's our family and friends, but sometimes it's perfect strangers who might ask if we have children. And if we say no, then, they start asking all kinds of questions. Why? Or they say, have you tried this? Or why don't you adopt? So how do we make sure that our love, our response to them is not rude?
Yeah, that's hard because that hits on such that's such a personal level. I mean, I think it's sometimes probably worse than if somebody would just walk up to you on the street and punch you in the face, because at least that would justify you hitting them back in a certain context. You know what I mean? But and so it does. It really it hurts deep. It cuts deep, and it wounds very, very deeply. But this is where the true reality of Christianity hits in, right? So sometimes, maybe people are a little, condescending, or maybe they are a little rude, and that still doesn't give us license to be rude back. We have to kind of grapple with that internally. But then you have the quote innocent comments, right, where okay, so they said something that's rude, but I know they weren't being rude, but it still hurts. How do I not be rude back? It's like, well, see, this is then where we take it one step further, and this is where the concept that this is more, leaned upon in the Eastern traditions, but the idea of voluntary versus involuntary sin. So now I'm not seeing everybody running around who is making, suggestions and comments, oh, they're publicly sinning. That's not what I'm saying here, but
Right.
the idea of an involuntary sin, like this person might try to be like have intentions to be nice, right? To be helpful, but they don't even know how hurtful they're being. But that doesn't give them license to like just keep saying these things. And so that's where you get this idea of like, yeah, that's kind of like an involuntary sin. You shouldn't be saying that. But then if we think about it in that mind frame of like, okay, this person like literally doesn't know what they're doing. They're trying to be helpful. They're really, just let me pray for them. And if we look at it
Right.
in that idea, like we're all broken, we're all sinners, we're all making mistakes. Like this person is making a mistake they're completely unaware about. And to put it in that context of faith and salvation and the long haul, maybe it eases it slightly. Just know because just as that person has the potential and propensity for an involuntary sin of, we'll just say, of running the mouth, right? Or something like that.
Right.
So do I.
Yeah.
So do we all. So then that kind of puts it on. It's like, oh, well, maybe I should be a little more cautious about myself as well. And it always ends with, well, yeah, pray for them. Like if somebody hurts you intentionally or even unintentionally, just try to, keep it in the moment. Just say thank you or whatever, whatever response you have. And then ultimately just, go and pray for that person and pray for yourself as well. So
Yeah, thank you. I think that is so helpful. It's a hard one, but I
it's,
think those are really helpful
yeah.
recommendations. All right, we have a few minutes left, so let's look at a couple of those positive things that St. Paul says love is. And one of the things he says is that love is patient. And that's very positive, but I find that one to be really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband is really finds patience to be hard. So, how can we try to be patient, maybe as we relate to our spouses and to others, but also in I guess sort of how we care and can be patient with ourselves, especially if we're in a tender season.
Yeah, yeah. It's really, really difficult. But think about, not only what St. Paul says in First Corinthians 13, think about the marital vows, right? We're in this for the long haul. And the
Yeah,
long haul requires patience. But, coming from one of the most, my wife will tell you, I'm one of the most impatient people that she knows. So,
yeah,
but uh, coming from that lens, patience is not simply, okay, let me endure this for the time and just keep my mouth shut. It's like, no, I'm patient to the extent that I know we're going to be in this for the long haul and we have to, and we are going to get there, right? So I am going to be patient. I'm going to be steadfast, right? I'm going to not, um, uh, how do I want to say it? Like not collapse, right? I'm going to find that strength. I'm going to find that hope and that support through whatever communities I can, through my parish, through Springs, to family, friends, whoever. And in the more difficult moments, I will lean on them so that in the lighter moments, I will regain my strength. I will regroup. And it's an ebb and a flow. And that's what is meant by patience. It's more endurance, or like, Christ says in the gospel, how much longer must I endure you, right? The
right.
long enduring Lord, right? Well, that's what sometimes we say, think about our spouses, right? How much time must I endure you? Like, well, quite some time. Quite some
Right.
time is the answer. So,
Right. Well, and that's actually one of the things that St. Paul says love endures, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, he also says that it bears, it believes, it hopes, and it never fails. So there's a lot in there, and we only have a couple minutes left. So I don't know, maybe you can choose one or two of those, or kind of summarize, how we should be loving our spouses with that kind of love that St. Paul says that is hopeful, and that bears each other, and that doesn't fail.
Yeah. Well, what is it? what does it bear? It bears the burden of the cross. It bears the burden of, pain, of suffering, of loss, but then it bears the weight of true love, right? Of
Mhm.
agape. It bears that responsibility. It bears the weight of everything that one could think of in life, the good and the bad. And that's all carried along by, Jesus Christ, right? So that's the thing. We're not alone in this, right? Love. And the reason love does not fail is because that love has to, must be rooted in Jesus Christ. And the
Yes.
mutual love between the spouses rooted in love of Jesus Christ. And that's the love that does not fail. That's what he's talking about. And that's how we have to live our lives. But this is the hard love, right? This is the love that isn't fleeting, that isn't temporary, that isn't like, well, my chicken nuggets got cold. Now I don't love them anymore.
Right.
It's like, no, it's like you love your spouse through the good times and through the bad. And, that's the burden we bear, but it's a beautiful burden, right?
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. Like think of, since we're just into the Paschal season now, think about it. Christ bore the weight of our sins, right? To allow us to re-enter into paradise. And that's what we do through our marriages, through our lives, right? We bear the rough stuff. We endure, we're patient, we're kind, and then what's the payoff for all that? Well, paradise,
Yeah.
eternal life in Jesus Christ. That's that's what we're getting at here. So really, all we're doing is imitating Christ's suffering in his life in our lives, and that's agape. That's the love, and I can't say anything more about it because from there words fail, and we just
Yeah.
live it. That's the thing. And how do we do that? Over time. That's that.
Yeah. It's beautiful, so encouraging. And I love the fact that St. Paul ends by saying that love never fails. And that understanding that we fail all the time. I know I fail all the
Oh,
time,
oh yeah,
but
multiple times a day. My wife always reminds me.
that's right. That's right. But God doesn't fail. Like, thank goodness that, as you said, this love is founded on Jesus Christ, not on our own strength. And that, it's God who keeps this love enduring and believing and all of those things that we mentioned. It's all through His grace. And what a beautiful gift, Father Paul. You are a beautiful gift to this
Oh,
ministry too.
thank
And
you.
thanks so much for teasing out a little bit of what love is. And now we all have the rest of our lives to keep unpacking it, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing, right? We're always learning, we're always growing, and we are always finding new ways to love and appreciate our spouses, but also different ways and new ways to love and appreciate our Lord. And that's what it is. It's not static. Love is not static. Salvation is not static. Faith is not static. Worship is not static. So don't be static. Work at it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Father. This was really great. And listeners, we love being with you too. We love walking with you and praying for you. So please know that we are always here for you. And until next time, God bless you.
God be with you.